Exodus. In the Garden of Eden it is said that Adam and Eve were complete, whole and in total harmony with God, nature, each other and themselves. Judge, as George now called him, was definitely still living in Eden. He seemed to be the embodiment of innocence and primordial simplicity. This was disconcerting for George, who wanted his now 6-year-old to be more independent, wise and critical in his thinking. Elijah, on the other hand, was happy to just observe the world around him. He was happy to spend hours rubbing his hands against the different tree barks in the forest bordering their backyard. Each tree scraping against his sensitive hands spoke a language that he seemed to understand, each telling its story of surviving harsh winter nights and smoldering summer days. Squirrels and robins alike left their invisible marks on the tree as they landed or climbed for safety. Sometimes Sally would find Elijah weeping with his arms around a tree, hugging it. The stories he heard communicated deep in his heart were sometimes overwhelming for him. Elijah knew deep in his heart that the whole world was deeply connected to him. He could not express this in words, of course, being only 6 years old, but he didn't need to. He lived it, he breathed it. Everything seemed to speak to him, and he loved to speak back. For example, one day he decided to pick up an earthworm and ask her questions. Do you enjoy living under the earth? Are you afraid of being forgotten by the rest of us? Sometimes I wish to hide under the earth too. It must be so quiet there. This all concerned George. One day enough was enough for George, and so he, like a good parent, went to the Zellers on his way back from work and bought Elijah an Atari. It came with 2 joysticks and a Pac-Man cartridge. George was convinced that he was going to teach his son about real life. There was no time to hug trees and talk to earthworms, engineers and doctors. They lived in the real world. They made money. They lived the better life. Pac-Man, George proudly thought, was going to be the perfect lesson for his son. You see, son, he was daydreaming about his speech. You see, son, life is like Pac-Man. The goal is to get as much as you can without being eaten by your enemies. Sometimes, when you get these big ones, you can eat your enemies. Isn't that so exciting? George came home and set up the Atari. Of course, technology never cooperates the way it is supposed to. After playing around with the switcher that was attached to the antenna, he finally got Pac-Man to show up on the 12-inch color TV that was sitting in the living room. He smiled at Pac-Man, as one would a good friend, and thought to himself, Elijah is going to love this game. Fun and learning, what more could he ask for? Judge, ya Habibi, I have a surprise for you. Ya Sally, where is Elijah? To their shock, they found Elijah sitting outside with a majestic cardinal sitting only 2 feet away from him. It looked as though they were in deep conversation. The cardinal's red head was turned towards Elijah, and he looked very intently at him. The cardinal sang a short tune as it was bopping its head. Elijah slowly extended his hand. Mr. Cardinal accepted the invitation. He hopped slowly towards Elijah. This moment is magical, thought Sally. Mr. Cardinal was about to step into Elijah's hand. Sally was mesmerized. Elijah. As soon as George's voice reached Elijah's ears, he found Mr. Cardinal had already leapt to the sky and flew off. Sally could have sworn that the cardinal seemed sad in his flight. For Sally, as a child, spoke to earthworms too. How could she know what a sad cardinal flight looked like if she herself hadn't conversed with a few herself? The child within her, the one who was mesmerized just a moment ago, pushed out a big wet bead of a tear to the rim of her eyelid. Adult Sally whacked her husband with the back of her hand on his shoulder. George, you couldn't just wait for the cardinal to land on Judge's hand. What she said inwardly was, George, why can't we be like kids? Couldn't you just let the cardinal land on my hand? Why did you take me away from my parents? However, she didn't allow herself to give attention to those movements in her heart. And the moment she suppressed it, the inner child also drowned inside. You are an adult, Sally. Get yourself together. Come, Elijah. I have something to show you." As the three of them made their way into the living room, George could not hide his excitement and pride at what he knew would be a great surprise for his son. "This, Elijah, is an Atari. Look, you put the game cartridge here in the middle. You have to push down well. Then you turn on the switch behind the TV. Come, look, you do it like this. And voila, you have Pac-Man. I'll show you how it works. You grab the joystick. This gives you control over what happens on the screen. This big red button starts the game. Okay, watch closely. You see, look. Pac-Man is going to the left, down, left again, up. You see, I am the one who is controlling it. George, your son won't care about this. He just wants to be outside. Come, Elijah. Come, you try it. You see, Elijah, Pac-Man is not just a game. It is like real life, Habibi. You have to try and get the most out of life. Try to get as much as you can without being eaten by your enemies." George paused his pontification and gave a proud look to his wife. He felt like he was a genius for trying to fix his son using a video game. "You see these big circles, Judge? They make you powerful. They give you power to eat up your enemies. I want you to understand, you are not a young boy anymore. You are in grade 1. Life is serious. You need to work hard so you can become powerful, and so you can get as much as you want. This is the good life, so what do you think?" Elijah, though only 6, had an incredibly sober demeanor. It came from his deep silence. He looked straight at his dad and said, "Baba, when will Pac-Man be satisfied? How much will be enough for him?" Elijah gently put the joystick down and looked deep into his mom's eyes. Actually, he was looking for the little girl inside of her. "Thanks, Dad. It's a great gift." He walked away from the living room, went straight for the backyard, sat on the steps with his hands stretched out. Mr. Cardinal would not come back tonight. Both Elijah and Mr. Cardinal felt quite misunderstood by his dad. The Atari was sold for $198 20 years later. He got that much for it because he'd promised the guy who bought it from him that it was only played once.